Hello, welcome to part 2 here for graphing absolute value functions in 4-4 algebra students. What we learned in the previous video is to hopefully identify some patterns to make graphing absolute value functions easier for us, where we don't have to build the entire table all the time. We have to build a little bit of it. But let's take a look at number 4 and see. We're going to now apply the information from the first video. In the first video, we looked at question number 2, which told me if I added a number outside of the absolute value, it moved it up the y-axis in that direction. Positive 2, it moved to positive 2. So what I'm going to do on this, I'm going to guess my key point. Okay, let's guess the key point. Okay, well, it's minus 4, so I'm thinking that key point is 4 down from the origin, would be right here. So I think that key point is the point 0, -4. Now I think it's 0 because there's nothing inside the absolute value that's moving it left or right. Remember in number 3, that plus 4 inside the absolute value moved it left or right. Again, if you can see these patterns and remember them, life will become much, much easier for you. So I think 0, -4 is the key point, and I've got 0 here. So let's figure out 0 first and see if that indeed is the case. All right, so I have the absolute value of 0 minus 4. Well, the absolute value of 0 is 0, and 0 minus 4 is -4. Okay, so I have determined that that is indeed a point on the graph. Well, I think that it would be the key point where it's going to change direction there, but we need to prove it now. So let's pick a point on each side of that. Okay, so let's go over here to x equals 1. And let's plug it in and let's see if x equals 1, we're going to hope that it's right there, -3, but we need to work it out to prove it. Okay, so -1 absolute value minus 4. Okay, absolute value of -1 is 1. 1 minus 4 is -3. Hey, it worked. Yay, so we're happy. So if I am 100% sure that this is it, I need to test, I just graphed that wrong, didn't I? Sorry about that. -1 is actually right here, -1, -3. I need to now test +1, where I'm hoping that +1 is there, the point I plotted at the wrong time a moment ago. But let's prove it here and see if absolute value of 1 minus 4, 1 minus 4 is indeed -3. So guess what? I don't need to plot these last 2 points because I see the pattern here. It turns right there. I found my key point. Sorry about my bad handwriting right there. I found the key point, so I know that that graph goes like this. Just made my life a whole lot easier there. Okay, so I don't need to do those. I know that at 2, it's going to end up right there, and I know that at -3, it's going to end up right there, okay, because it just steps up that way. All right, so I just made my life a lot easier, and that's supposed to be a smiley face right there. Well, let's look on at the next one, because I'm going to show you a new thing now, because in number 5, we have this. So let's try to figure out what that does to the graph. But let's also guess. Okay, let's see if we can guess the key point. All right, well, let's guess the key point. And let's see, okay, I've got a +3 inside the absolute value. So let's look back at number 3. All right, inside that one, we had +4. And okay, so it's adding inside, and it moved it to the left. So +4 moved it the opposite 4 along the x-axis. Okay, so if I have +1, I'm going to go ahead and guess that my key point is going to be right here. All right, I'm going to guess that it moves it left 1. Now, there's nothing outside there added, so I'm not going to guess that it moves up or down, because remember, outside moves the key point up and down the y-axis. So let's guess that the key point is the point that would be -1, 0. Now that's our guess. We want to test it now in a table. Now notice on this side I don't have tables, because you're not going to get tables when you actually do this. You're going to have to create them based on that key point. I have x, y, and I want to guess -1, that it's negative 1, 0, but we need to test it. Now we do have this negative sign outside here. Let's watch what happens with that. We have x is negative 1 plus 1. Okay, so that would be the opposite of the absolute value of 0, which is 0. Yay, I was right. So that is the key point. Okay, now what we have to do is pick a point to the left and to the right of that. So let's pick if x is 0, okay? Because I've got my key point, so I'm thinking it's going to turn on 0 or on negative 1, 0. So let's see what it does if x is 0. All right, and let's watch what happens. If I plug that in here, we have, let me do a little dotted line here so we don't get too messy here. I have 0, so it's negative, absolute value of 0 plus 1. Okay, so that would equal, I'll work to the right this time, the opposite of the absolute value of positive 1. Okay, since that negative sign is outside the parenthesis, that stays negative. The absolute value of 1 is 1, so it's actually 0, negative 1. Well, that's interesting. That's right here. So maybe that's not the key point. Maybe I picked the wrong key point. Let's try a value over here on the other side of that key point and see if that, what happens to that, to see if the graph keeps going up and see if we can figure out what's going on here. So that would be the value x is negative 2. Okay, if x is negative 2, let's do the math here. Opposite, x is negative 2. Plug it in the original equation, which is up here. Negative 2 plus 1. Don't forget about that negative sign outside. That equals the opposite of. Negative 2 plus 1 is negative 1. Okay, now don't forget that outside negative sign. Inside the absolute value, you take that, it becomes 1. But you have this sign out here, so that's actually negative 1. So that is the point negative 2, comma, negative 1. All right, I got a little messy with my writing there. Let me clean this up a little bit. Okay, here's what happened. This works out to be negative 1. So I now know that I have the value negative 2, negative 1. Watch what happens here. Negative 2, negative 1 is right here. Do you see what's happening now? It flipped. This sign, this negative sign, flipped my absolute value. And if I continued graphing these points, this is the graph I would end up with. And that is it. Again, please draw better lines than me because you have straight edges, and it would take me too long to grab my lines. So that is the graph for this absolute value function. Okay, so now we know that the key point will move the same if you add inside or subtract inside with that negative sign. The only thing that negative sign will do, it will flip the whole thing upside down. Okay, so let's combine everything here with number 6. Take a look at this. We have y is equal to the absolute value of x plus 3 with the end of the absolute value with minus 2 outside. Okay, so we've got plus 3 inside the absolute value. Now, so what we want to do is we want to guess our key point. Guess our key point. Well, here's what we learned. If we add something inside, what that does is it moves it left or right along the x-axis. So that's going to move that way 3. In other words, negative 3. Okay, that's the x value. Now this minus 2, that's outside. So like on number, let's see, which one was that? On number 4, we saw the outside point moved it down. Okay, negative 4 moved it down. So this negative 2, I'm guessing is going to move it down 2. In other words, negative 2. So I'm going to guess that the key point is negative 3, negative 2. And we have to have that key point because that's kind of the center of the entire absolute value graph. So let's plug it into a grid and see. X, Y. Here we go. All right, if x is negative 3, watch what happens. You have the absolute value of negative 3 plus 3, close the absolute value, minus 2. Now let's work it out. That's 0 minus 2, that's negative 2. Guess what? That's it. That's the ordered pair, -3, -2. All right, -3, -2 is right there. Now that I know that this goes up because there's no negative sign, I can predict that the points that make up this graph will go like this. And that's what all of these patterns will show you. And indeed, it would. Okay, and if we plugged in those values there, like 0, for example, if we plugged in 0 in there, you'd have 3 minus 2 would be 1. And that's where 0, 1 ended up. Even though I drew a really bad line, it actually does go through 0, 1. If I plugged in -5 over here, and I did the math, -5 plus 3 would be -2. That would be +2. Minus 2 would be 0, which was right there. Okay, so those little tricks that we found can make the graphing so much easier for us. I'm going to stop this one, and there will be a third short video I'd like you to watch as we combine all of it together in the last two examples. So sit tight and finish this up.